wish you a fantastic tour with us, and we hope you will enjoy it. My plan is just to lay the foundation for what Oren is going to explain to us all. I'll just make, in the next few minutes, just a little overview of the city of David and the main important stories and verses associated with the place. A lot of the Bible and the prophecies were written over there, but I will just focus on King David's time and show you again the significance of the city of David, walk you through a few places, and then we'll hand it over to Oren, which will give us a deeper understanding of the archaeological excavations that took place over there, especially in the past few years. So at the moment, we're looking at Israel from above. If you are not familiar with Israel, here's the coastline of the Mediterranean. You can see the Sea of Galilee right over here. And you can see the Dead Sea and even the Red Sea all the way at the bottom, okay? So this is, again, Israel, and our focus will be Jerusalem, of course. Just before we continue, I wanted to show you the map of the tribes, okay? The map of the 12 tribes, the children of Israel, sons of Jacob. And if you look carefully, you'll see that Jerusalem is right in the middle. I guess there is some feedback from one of the viewers, so if you can be very kind, just mute yourself. So if you look carefully at the map of the tribes, Jerusalem is right in the center within the territory of Benjamin, the youngest of the tribes and the favored one by Jacob. And Jerusalem is the Jebusite city situated over there. When we're talking about King David, he's coming from Bethlehem, which is a bit southern from Jerusalem, over here. Just over here, you can see maybe Bethlehem, but he rules in Hebron for 7 years, and only in the 7th year he will move to Jerusalem and conquer the city of David, turning it the capital of the 12 tribes. So let's see, let's take a look. So let's zoom towards the old city of Jerusalem, okay? And here we are. We're just landed above the old city of Jerusalem. And if you look carefully, you'll easily see that this is the pattern of the old city walls today, just over here, just like that. And we have different quarters. The most important part is the Temple Mount and Mount Moriah, okay? And the different quarters, if you've been to Israel before, you are probably familiar with it. But the thing about the city of David is that it's outside the old city walls, okay? It's outside the old city walls, this little area that I'm circling right now, okay? So you can clearly see it's not within the boundaries of the old city today, okay? If we look at the city of David, just before that, sorry. If we look at the city of David, over here, you can see this is just a little hill southern from the old city of Jerusalem, just this one, just this area over here, sorry. Just this area over here. And that's how it probably looked like back in the days. So what do we have here? We have 3 or maybe 4 important parts to it. The most important part is the temple itself, the temple area that did not existed in the days of David himself, but only in the days of Solomon, his son. You can also see the palace of David, Solomon, and the Judean kings. And this is where the rest of the people lived, just over here. You can actually see a hierarchy between the common people, the king, but there is something above the king. Unlike other empires that the kings were actually, let's say, gods, okay? Not in Jerusalem, not in Judea, the king is submitted to God. Another part that we're going to see, and we'll talk about it more deeply, is the spring of Gihon, okay? So we will talk about it later, but everything that you see here is a tiny area, okay? We're talking about maybe 15 minutes across, 10, 15 minutes walk across. It's really very, very, very small area, okay? Now, I'm going to take you now to the days of King David that looked at the walls of Jerusalem. This is the Iron Age walls. The walls that he saw were probably slightly different, but in the same location. And these are the ancient walls of Jerusalem. When King David explored the city just before he conquered it, he wondered, how can I conquer this stronghold, this fortress of the Jebusites? How can I do that? So he remembered that long ago, hundreds of years before his time, Abraham met Melchizedek at the valley of Shaveh, or the Kidron Valley, which is just down here. Okay, so he didn't want to desecrate the Temple Mount and conquer the city from the north. That would be the most logical thing to do. Let me show you why it's so logical. If you're a strategist, if you are an army man, you would definitely attack the city of David, which is on a low hill southern from the Temple Mount. You would definitely attack it from the threshing floor of Aravna, the Jebusite. Okay, you can definitely attack it from the north and attack the city of David, which is in an inferior area compared to the Temple Mount. But he says, no, I cannot desecrate this area. I will have to attack it from the bottom, from the lower part, from the water shaft, somewhere down here. Okay, I will attack it from there, as the script, as the text actually tells us. So in the book of Samuel, there's a short description of how King David conquered the city. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." They thought David cannot get in here. Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David, on that day. David had said, anyone who conquers the Jebusite will have to use the water shaft to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. Okay, so we see two things. First, he doesn't want to desecrate the Temple Mount. He doesn't want to desecrate Mount Moriah, so he attacks from the south, from the water shaft, and he also resents the lame and the blind. That's the water shaft. What you see here were excavated years ago, starting from the 19th century. We understand where is the city of David. That's the water shaft we're talking about. This is the original Canaanite tunnel. And I have to say something, of course, about this resentment of David to the lame and the blind. 1,000 years will pass before this resentment will be healed by his descendant, by Jesus himself, that will only perform 2 miracles in Jerusalem, healing the lame man in the pools of Bethesda that you see over here, and healing the blind in the Siloam pool. Only 1,000 years later, Jesus will correct the heart of his ancestor David. So the years go by in David's kingdom. He's now ruling from the top of the mountain of the fortress of Zion. He's just above it. He's enjoying his palace. He's enjoying his people. Sometimes there are wars. Sometimes there is peace. His rebel son Absalom would definitely not make his life easier. Okay, but in general, for the next 400 years, the rulers of Judea, the kings of Judea, will be his descendants. So from here, from the Bet HaTzofer, from the viewpoint of the city of David, you can see the Temple Mount and the Al-Aqsa Mosque just over here. And on the other side, you can see the topography. You can see how small and how low this hill, how inferior it is compared to the rest of the region. So with that in mind, I'll just say that this is the area that was excavated long ago, the royal quarter of the Judean kings, this area over here. And this is all minutes walk from one place to the next. And I'll just say that this tiny little hill changed human history as we know it. This is the place where the Bible was written. This is the place where the prophets acted, as Oren will show us. And just above it, just a bit north from it, you can see Mount Moriah and the Temple Mount. So please put that in mind. Again, we're going to walk through a few different places, the spring area and the Siloam pool, which is down here, and the Pilgrim's Road. We're going to walk like that, and we'll finish at the Temple Mount. So this is our plan. And with that, I'm handing it over to Oren.
Thank you, Itamar, for the introduction. Just a second, we'll get go. and activate. Okay. So my name is Oren Sapir. I want to thank all that gave me the introduction and let me walk in. So I'm going to take you to new discoveries. We'll have a few things that will help us find out where we are and what we're talking about. Most of what I'm going to show you isn't open to the public yet. So I'm sorry. This is like a preview of what will happen shortly, I hope, as things lessen out and ease off. More people will be able to join in and see this. And throughout our presentation, we'll have a bar at the bottom that will highlight the period we will talk about. As you see, at the moment, we'll only focus on 3 of the historical periods, and actually of one of these 3, mainly 2, the Iron Age and the Roman era, which means the First Temple period and the Second Temple period. In addition, what we'll have is a map that shows you with a little star what area in the city we're talking about and the basic size of the city as we know it throughout the history of the city of Jerusalem. So here we dive into the first stop, and that is the spring itself. If you look at the background behind me, you'll actually see a reconstruction of the city walls of the Jebusite Bronze Age period city of Jerusalem. And this is another partly reconstructing, trying to show what the walls look like with this funny bump. Let's look at this long arm that stretches out from the city walls down towards the location of the Gihon Spring. This tower that is now circled was discovered in excavations in the last 20 plus years, and excavations are actually still continuing there. And that same tower, in the trying to show it how it was discovered in pieces and we're making it into a painting that will list it a little bit easier, that's what we're talking about. So the fortification walls are right now in let's say beige color, and there's a massive spring tower above the Gihon Spring. And this massive wall you can see right now on the right is actually located right here. This was the first moment it was discovered. Look at these huge stones. Look at the person standing there. He's Eli Shukran, the archaeologist that was part of the team discovering this in the end of the 1990s. They found a massive stone wall in the very, very known construction style of the Middle Bronze Age, taking us to maybe a little bit before the days of Abraham, more or less, a massive fortification wall that really changed everything we knew about the history of Jerusalem. And to make things really annoying, in excavations lately in these 2 areas, the one on the right circled in blue, they actually found out that this tower went through a massive renovation during the First Temple period, and where you can see the fortified corridor made out of 2 stone walls marked in beige in the red oval, that's actually the walkway that leads people directly to what's below it. You see this blob, like bright blue blob that says round chamber pointing at it. So that round chamber is actually where people got their water from. But that means the spring itself is just a few yards away. And this is what the spring used to look like. I'm really sorry. Today there's a metal grate above it and a walkway for people, but that's what it looked like. The water just flows directly from the stone into a small cave and then flows today into a later period channel that's known as Hezekiah's channel. But in the days of David, this is where the spring is, and reaching that round chamber, the water just flowed naturally in a small, few yard long channel. And that's a location where everyone arrived. One of the people arriving there just slightly after David conquers the city and takes over this area and makes it his capital, was his son, not his oldest, his apparently 10th son, Solomon. And this is the location where that is actually taking place. The king said to them, who? Well, this is David that's telling his people, what you do, take my loyal soldier, take whoever remains loyal to me, because one of his sons, Adoniah, actually announced himself as the new king. And take my loyal soldiers and have my son Solomon ride on my mule and bring him down to the Gihon. So right on top of the Gihon spring, on top of the water source, let the priest Zadok and the prophet Nathan anoint him their king over Israel. Whereupon you shall sound the horn and shout, long live King Solomon. So when you're standing down in a valley, in a deep location, in between massive mountains, and you don't need a big crowd, even though I assume there was quite a big crowd. You don't need too many people to start shouting together, long live King Solomon. And it echoes all the way around and hundreds of yards down the valley. Adoniah, that was crowning himself at the same moment, hears the sound. So in the picture, what you can actually see is the bluish light that reconstructs the water that used to fill that deep pool. And this is a possible spot. Maybe, you can take a yard, a right to right, left, wherever, but this is the spot where people got their water from the Gihon spring. And this will be the spot where Solomon was crowned king. And from his days on, the city expanded up north and the temple was built on Mount Moriah, the area of Solomon's temple. An interesting thing is that you can reach this spot today, but you can't reach what is just a little bit up. So now you see the area circled. It says area U in rock cut rooms. Look, it's just a little bit up, really 20 yards barely away from that round chamber and area. Excavation in the last few years in that area discovered quite a few things that rocked the entire understanding of what Jerusalem actually has. So the first thing is a room from the end of the first temple period, discovered, smashed, and destroyed, a room in a house. What you see here, what's circled in the red dots, is ashes, locations where you have burnt material. Look at the massive pottery that's in the picture, crushed in pieces onto the floor of this room. In the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem, end of the Iron Age, end of the first temple period, this room was shattered to pieces. And because it was shattered and caved in and everything just collapsed into it, everything was totally preserved. So inside this room, they found dozens of interesting finds, including many seals and seal impressions that you can see here in the hand of the archaeologist. On purpose, I have this picture, and not only because he's a very good friend of mine, but also I want you to see how the real size of these tiny little objects known as seal impressions, and a seal that's in between his fingers. This is actually an Egyptian imitation seal. It's actually a local, but it looks like it's an Egyptian seal. And these are the little objects telling us of administration that are left behind. Many more objects were found. We're still in the same room, in the same house, and that is seal impressions upon handles of jugs that tell us the administration of the city, making sure the taxes reach the government and not lost on the way. The jugs for taxation were printed in advance. So this is Area U. And this is important. Why? Because Area U has houses and structures from the first temple period. Just next to it, touching it, the walls touching each other, which means they're the same story, the same period, is the rock-cut rooms. This is an overview of the rock-cut rooms. They're actually a series of rooms that are all mostly, not fully, mostly cut into the stone, because we're talking about a very steep slope. And what you can see here on the left is a doorway that was discovered sealed shut with a stone wall. The archaeologists discovered it and removed all the stones. And inside they discovered, right there, a funny object, but not one, but several of these. And then when they cleaned it up and discovered and really looked at it, they found out that these are pottery incense burners and other objects that are used for cultic uses. And that means this was actually part of something religious, in some religious use. We continue, and now we go to the right. You see there's a funny hole in the wall on the right there where the blue circle is, and that is actually where you can put a massive wooden beam. Underneath it, you'll put sacks, and on the edge of the other edge of the beam, you'll put weights. This is actually an olive press. There we go, which means this is where you can make olive oil. And that's also something that you use quite a lot. We just anointed Solomon a few yards down. You need oil for that. And this is production of olive oil. The interesting thing is that this isn't an industrial size, but it isn't also a house type size. It's something weird in the middle. And that means that it's much more than what a household will need, but not something that you produce to sell out. It's something for inner use. And that also is quite interesting. We continue with our rock-cut rooms, and we have the room right in the middle. That's actually partly, let's say, in the shadow of this massive beam that's right here in the middle of the screen. This is actually a pillar made out of steel holding up what's above it so nothing will collapse. And inside there, they found a standing stone. When I say a standing stone, what do I mean? Try to think someone took a stone and put it up on its narrow part. It will easily topple over. So how do you hold it up? Look at the surrounding area of the standing stone. You see small stones were built like a base circling it around. That's interesting because standing stones are known from the days of Abraham, from the days of Jacob in the book of Genesis, that every place they visit and pray, or almost every place, not every, and many of them, they put up a stone and sometimes even anoint it with oil. This was considered a way of religious act, of some kind of cultic site. Later on, when we get to Deuteronomy, this is actually not allowed anymore. But in the first temple period, not only in Jerusalem, standing stones were discovered. We're talking about some site where there's incense, where there's olive oil, where there's a standing stone, and wait up, there's even more. Some weird installation in the last room that we don't really understand. These funny V-shaped crevices cut into the rock that may have been some base for a wooden structure that we don't know what it was used for, but there's something weird here in addition that we can't explain. I don't know if aliens made this, as someone offered, but we have something very weird that might be connected to the whole area, and the most important, a full reconstruction. Thanks to Shalom Kveller, that was the painter of this painting for the city of David. And what you can actually see here is those funny V-shaped, whatever that is, and the room where the incense burners were hidden. To the right, you see the olive press. In the center, you can see two rooms. The one without the person is where the standing stone is. The one with the person is actually a small altar. We're talking about a small, very small and nice temple. That's what it is. And that means that what we actually have here is a small temple. In the same time, Solomon's temple is just a few hundred yards up on Mount Moriah. Is this shocking? Actually, a little bit. We know biblical Jewish temples of the kingdom of Judah throughout the kingdom in several sites they were found. We know of one in Arad and in Tel Beersheba, and in Lachish, and we have evidence in many places. We even have in Motza, that's several miles west of Jerusalem. But finding such a thing in Jerusalem itself is quite impressive and quite weird. But the most interesting thing is that these series of rooms were all found covered up, totally concealed with dirt and garbage. Covering this thing up means someone decided to conceal it, remove it, stop the use of this structure. And that means that we can connect it to the days of Hezekiah, as 2 Kings tells us, that he removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Asherah, which was an idolatry. And he broke in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. We're talking about the King Hezekiah. What does he do? He gets rid of the idolatry or semi-idolatry, places that were temples that were apparently for the Jewish God, but weren't in the right spot. What do you do with it? You remove it. How do you remove it? You hide them. You cover them up. No one will keep on using this or even knowing it exists. So we can actually date the time it's over, somewhere close to the year 700 or a little bit before BCE. How much time was it in use in the period before? The archaeologists assume that it was used for maybe a century and a half, maybe slightly more, but not much more than that by the finds discovered. There are archaeologists that claim, wait a minute, it might have started earlier, but at the moment, that's the evidence we have, and we're waiting for further finds and further excavations to keep on discovering this very interesting, small, local temple, not the Temple of Solomon, small local temple within Jerusalem, First Temple period. We skip about 100 and something, 50 or so yards up north to the top of the ancient city of David, that in the days of Solomon, as I said, was expanding up towards Mount Moriah. And we're talking about that expansion. The area you see here is in the edge of what is known as the archaeological park excavations. And there, Dr. Eilat Mazar has been excavating for many years. And in the last 10 years, she came back to this place and found lots of things. So the first thing is, this area is actually a walkway in an area that is basically not more than a city gate. Nothing really important, I have to admit. You got city gates everywhere. But this is a place where everyone can walk into apparently the royal quarter. Nearby, just beyond the wall that's at the top of the picture, a very interesting piece of stone was found, not a very large one. If you can see the size, we're talking about something that's about this size. Maybe you can see it on your screen. And this is a royal capital, a decoration. And this capital, we know, it's actually copied on the 5 shekel coin that we have today in Israel. This is the royal capital used in important, majestic, important structures all over Israel during the first temple period, in the city gates, in several cities, in the king's quarters or the governor's palace, and in important sites that were connected to the king. Three of these were just discovered in the last year in a newly discovered site in southern modern Jerusalem. But you see in the background of this picture, there's some structure, so let's zoom into it. And in the middle of that structure, what you can see are three jugs. These are all reconstructed. They were found shattered in pieces. And these jugs are 3 out of 12 discovered in this room. Each and every one was accessible, which means people came and put something in each and every one of them. So we can assume the contents of each and every one was something else. Here you can see Dr. Eilat Mazar, when she discovered this in 1989, trying to reconstruct the jugs as they were discovered. It took a while and things are put, and only one of them today is in the museum. On one of them, I hope you can see the one on the right, you can see a palm tree is etched on the top, which means maybe the context has something to do with dates or even date honey that is known as silan. In another one, you can see there's a broken inscription. Unfortunately, we only have 6 of its letters, but apparently it reads, to the minister of bakers or minister of in currency or something like that, which means each and every one has some other contents inside it. And we're talking about an administrative structure from those days. But the most interesting thing isn't the structure, it's the garbage outside. Because what actually happens is people gather in these structures, and what do? They bring their information, bring whatever they need, and very quickly, they write it all down. And when you write it all down, what might happen is this. You'll just throw everything outside. So when you throw things outside the wall, you'll actually be outside the city walls. And what you see here is the fortification. This is a picture from 2009, 2010 or so. And what they found is dozens of seal impressions that were thrown out, which means after they finished documentation, they just threw the garbage out the window. And they found all sorts of names. And this adds to many seal impressions we already know discovered in the city of David and actually in the ancient city of Jerusalem. But these ones you see aren't interesting. They're nice. The interesting ones were found slowly during the excavation. So you see an outer idea, you see the small tower, the royal bakery, as maybe it is, I'm not sure, I hope they're right, and the location pointing right there. They found this interesting seal impression in 2009, 2010 excavation. They put it with the other several dozen in a drawer and said, okay, in a few years we'll sit down and publicize all these information, all these finds and all the information, and we'll have no problem. What happened very quickly was that one of the archaeologists was shoveling through this information and suddenly noticed that they didn't read it correctly, and that this seal impression actually reads the following. If you look at it, you'll see in the center there's a sun disk. You can see the sun rays going down and up with its winged sun disk. On the right, you can see a symbol that is actually the Egyptian Ankh, that means life. And this thing actually has a name written above and below it. The name above, and I'll use my spotlight so you'll see it correctly, Lechizkiyahu, belonging to Hezekiah. And then there's a letter, A. And here there's a Z. Melech King Yehud, Judea, but it's broken. What we actually have here is the seal impression of Hezekiah, the king of Judah. You don't see a lot of those around. This is the first time ever that in an archaeological excavation, they found the seal impression of a Jewish king, of the king of Judah in the city itself. You can't have it any better. But the cool thing is that it's slightly broken, so we're missing a few letters. It actually fully read, belonging to Hezekiah, Ahaz, his father, which means son of Ahaz, starting in the first line, continuing in the second, the king of Judah. But why does he have Egyptian symbols on his seal impression? So there are a few ideas. One is the following. In 2 Kings 20, Hezekiah prays that he'll continue living after Isaiah said, you're going to die. After his prayer was accepted, he received years of life added to his days with the symbol of the sun shifting and the shadows shifting. So maybe here we have the sun and life implemented into his seal impression because of that. 2013, a few yards away, the excavation continues, and they found another seal impression. That's this one. It's broken, so we don't have everything, and it'll be easier to look at the full idea trying to reconstruct it. So what you see is legs and the tail of some animal. And below it, the first line reads to belonging to Isaiah. We're missing the end. And then 3 letters that might be the beginning of the word Navi, prophet. If this is Isaiah the prophet, that's really cool. But I don't know how many people have on their personal seal their profession, especially their profession prophet. We have scribes, we have servants, we have all sorts of that in archaeological finds, but prophet is something that has never been discovered. Most scholars say, let's take it carefully, let's take it easy. We're not sure this is Isaiah the prophet. But if it is, you can't have any better, because Hezekiah and Isaiah lived simultaneously. Sometimes had a little quarrels in between them, but they were actually the prophet and the king in a very, very important period of time in the days of the Assyrian assault upon Judea. So here we go. And we move all the way to the south, to the southern edge of the city of David, and we skip, as you can see on our line at the bottom, we skipped many hundred years to the early Roman period, to the end of the Second Temple period, to a place that was excavated by mistake about 15 or a little bit more years ago. And here we go to reach it. But to understand that, what it means, we need to actually join the visitors. We'll call them the pilgrims. Try to imagine someone coming. For example, if you come from my house, that's between Bethlehem and Hebron. So when coming from the south towards Jerusalem, you'd be reaching the city from the south, but there are ridges and valleys. So actually be able to enter this valley right here and walk all the way down to the southern edge of the city and enter at the southern gate and reach the main road of the city. When you reach the main road, you very quickly enter the pool of Shiloah, or Pool Salom. This was discovered by a tiny mistake. It actually happened because a sewage pipe was leaking. So they went to fix it. And as they were fixing it, the tractor hit something, moving back. An archaeologist comes in and they start discovering these amazing stairs that are in actually very, very good shape. You can see them right here in the picture. Discovered and slowly enlarging the excavation as much as was possible in the property along it that is possible to visit. And we'll talk about a massive pool. Try to think of a man-made, built, nicely staired, open space, something like 60 by 50 yards in size, a nice open space that could be filled up with water. You don't need your imagination, because in 2005, or maybe it was 2006, heavy winter rains, the drainage system of the street above didn't really handle the amount, and this is what you get. Everything flooded with water. So this is the pool of Shiloh in Hebrew, Pool of Salom, at the bottom of the city, and this is from the end of the Second Temple period. But underneath it, hiding, is a pool from before. And I assume that underneath it, even deeper down, not excavated yet, hiding is a pool even from before, because you know that this Hezekiah we just mentioned more than once. This Hezekiah made the underground Hezekiah's tunnel, diverting the water from the Gihon spring where we started to this exact location. So this is the Pool of Salom, and from here, you can join the main street of Jerusalem, slowly climbing up the hill. And that means we need to ask a question. So where do you really start your pilgrimage, your ascent? The Mishnah, the Jewish law, describes the following. All are obligated in the appearance, which means they need to appear in the temple, as well as offering the sacrifice, except for a long list of all those that don't have to come. There's a quite long list. When you think about it, if you sum up all these that don't have to come and offer a sacrifice, you might actually say that a lot less than, let's say, a lot less than 25% of the population really need to. An interesting thing is that one of those that doesn't have to come is a minor. Usually in Judaism, a minor is below the age of becoming obligated in the commandments, which means the age of 13. But here in this Mishnah, there's a debate about it. And who has the status of a minor, they ask. They give 2 options, which is something very, very regular in the ancient Jewish law, giving more than one option. Option number 1 is in green. Any child who is unable to ride on his father's shoulders and ascend from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount. This is what Beit Shammai says, which is a house of Jewish law, which means a child that can't sit on his father's shoulders. I don't know the participants, more than 200 people, so I don't know if you remember when children start sitting down, but at 7, 8, 9 months, children usually know how to sit, so they can sit on their father's shoulders and ride all the way up, which means the child, let's say a year old, will have to come by this opinion. Opinion number 2 in red. And Beit Hillel, the other house, says, any child who is unable to hold his father's hand and ascend on foot from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount, which means walking with his own 2 feet. Now, this is a child that's much older, 6, 7, 8, maybe even 9 years old, that can actually walk from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount. But wait a minute, what does that mean? The Temple Mount is inside Jerusalem. How can you go from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount? I wasn't the first one that asked this question. It was already asked by the sages of the Talmud. And here I have a quote from the Jerusalem Talmud, which was actually edited in the land of Israel, mainly in Tiberias in the north, a few centuries after the destruction of the Second Temple. Where do you measure from? Where you start? From the walls, from the houses? Where? And then they give an option given by one of the sages that lived in the 4th century. Shmuel says, from the Shiloh, from the Siloam. And the Shiloh is in the city, which means it's actually at the edge of the city, at the southern edge, at the bottom, which means, what do you measure? Can a child walk or be carried? If he can be carried or if he can walk from the bottom of the city to the Temple Mount. A painting that was drawn using this Mishnah as its background is today down at the bottom of the walk. And this specific one takes us from the bottom, carrying your calf, pointing up. Here we go. Hold my hand, Father. Let's walk all the way to the top, towards the Temple Mount. Just a second. Here we go. And we start our walk. Oh, sorry. There we go. From the pool, we start walking up the stairs. And in the beginning, it's 30 yards wide, apparently, a massive, wide open space that, because it's a valley, it widens up at the bottom. It narrows up as we go. And this is where we start our walk. We start our walk here with the people. One of the man on the left is the archaeologist in charge of the excavation for some 5 years. You can see the amazing stairs, how in good shape they are. And you can see the shops that are along the road as well. Shops, houses, where you can buy something to eat, something to drink, some souvenirs for your grandchildren as you start your way up the steps towards the Temple Mount. The steps were found shattered at the bottom, and inside when they removed the shatters, they found that actually there's a small drainage system underneath. Inside it, they found cooking pots that were found in amazing condition, which means people were, sorry to say it like this, eating dinner in this drainage system. And we actually have information from Josephus Flavius that tells us that people hid in the drainage system. So we continue our walk up, and suddenly they actually identified as a main open marketplace. How? By the many coins and many finds. On this specific find, that is actually a measuring vessel, an official measuring vessel, to make sure the measuring vessels that are used for volume in the market are accurate, and no one's actually cheating us as we walk up the street and want to buy some oil, some wine, or something else to drink. Up we go, and suddenly Nachshon, this archaeologist, discovers ballista stones, small ones, not the massive big ones, the small ones, thrown and shot by the Romans at the street, at the city, hitting it and left behind, telling us of the destruction of Jerusalem. Summer year 70. Nearby, as they walk, they can see the street itself. Here we go. We're climbing up the main street. You can see the side of the street in very, very good condition, still standing. You can see how it's narrowing around. But please notice the area around. You're actually in an excavation that, as I said, isn't open to the public. It was done under homes and under streets with this massive arch steel infrastructure to actually hold it all up. It's much, much wider than what my frame can show you, because they can't excavate it fully. You have to support whatever still exists nearby. Oh, sorry. And then we suddenly hit an interesting wooden box. Ready to open it? Here we go. What's inside it? Can you see the ashes? These are ashes of a wooden beam that was discovered crossing the street, which means it fell down from one side on fire onto the floor. When they discovered it, they managed to pick up pieces and take them to a lab. But this little portion of ashes was just crumbling in their fingers. They built a little wooden box around it to preserve it, telling us of the moments of destruction everywhere. So of course, ashes will tarnish your fingers the moment you touch them. still sitting here from 2,000 years ago, the destruction of Jerusalem. Oh, sorry. It jumped. Just a few feet away, what you can see is an interesting piece of stone that you can see its size. It has two holes. You can actually fit some metal ring inside it and pry it open and go into the drainage channel below. In this drainage channel, loads of finds were discovered. Seal impressions, drawings, a drawing of the temple candelabra, menorah, and even a Roman army sword that was found broken in two pieces. Apparently it fell in when the Romans were conquering Jerusalem. But the most amazing find discovered in this drainage channel is this golden bell. We know the high priest had golden bells and pomegranates along his overgarment. Now, the cool thing about this is that we're reading it exactly in the coming Saturday, the coming Shabbat, in just a week from now. We're going to read it in synagogues all over the world. The actually chapters of the book of Exodus that tells us of the garments of the high priest. And we can actually think maybe this is one of those golden bells left behind from 2,000 years ago. If not, it's a very precious piece of jewelry that someone wore on a necklace, on his robes, who knows. Immediately after this funny staircase that leads to nowhere was discovered, 4 stairs that literally lead to nothing, to a wall. So they understand this as some location, a stand where someone can stand and overlook the crowd walking up this road. Now we can understand it isn't only a market. It isn't only a step street. You need to puff and huff and walk up slowly up the massive way from all the way down towards the Temple Mount. It's also where there are announcements and maybe performances. So the people are joining and singing together when they walk the ascent towards the temple, when they come here in the festivals 3 times a year. This is the street. What was discovered of it from edge to edge where we know it is sometimes 15 yards thick at the middle. When we further go up, it reaches to something like 8. And that's a steady size, a little bit up as we go all the way up towards the Temple Mount. And because of that, in the excavation, where it was possible, they actually doubled the width. And we're able to find the houses that are nearby and sometimes the jewelry left behind by someone, a nice ring with the precious stone found inside it right there. As we continue, about 150 yards of the street were excavated, cleaned up, not open to the public yet. I don't know when it will be open, but it continues and continues all the way and reaches, reaches the foot of the Temple Mount. And from one of the ancient entrances, people entered that huge opened holy site where the temple stood. So now I'm hopping this quickly through what we just did. We saw Bronze Age fortifications, we saw a temple site and seal impressions from the first temple period, and an amazing portion still being excavated of the main pilgrimage road that climbs up the main street of Jerusalem. And I'm going to stop right here and let Itamar take over.
Thank you very much, Owen. I just need the 2 minutes of your time before I pass it over to Elisa and Joseph. And I just want to remind you of David that was not lucky enough to see the temple that was only built in the days of his son Solomon. But we are lucky enough to walk in the streets of Jerusalem and to go up to the Temple Mount. And I want to remind us the words of King David himself in his songs, his famous songs from Psalms. He says this: "Who may ascend into the hill of the Lord, or who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to an idol, nor sworn deceitfully, he shall receive blessing from the Lord, all righteousness from the God of his salvation. This is Jacob, the generation of those who seek him, who seek your face." So this is the Western Wall Plaza, and I'll just jump a little bit, to show us not just the plaza, but also the entrance to the Temple Mount today, the Mugrabi Bridge, that's what you see over here, and the entrance just over here. Be sure to walk in with your right foot when you'll visit here with us. Okay, enter with the right foot. And because right is right in front of the Lord. Okay, so everything we want to do properly, we do it with the right foot. I'll skip just a little bit on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and I'm taking you towards the holiest place, up to the Temple Mount, and I will end with the words of King David that said this: "One thing I have desired of the Lord, that will I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple." So this is what we wish for us all, to enjoy the light of God. And with that, I'm passing it over to our friends Elisa and Joseph.
Elisa, you're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you, Itamar, and thank you, Oren, for the absolutely fascinating session and the tour. Very, very thought-provoking, fascinating to see how the Bible really, really comes alive inside the city of David. There are some questions, and I know a number of you want to open up your mics. I can imagine you have a number of questions. And before we do that, I'm going to pass this back to Joseph for a few words, and then please stay on because I know there'll be a number of questions that that the guides will both answer. So thank you.
So thank you to Elisa and Itamar and Oren for a very educational, informative, and really riveting virtual tour. We wish that you could all come to Jerusalem with us, if not this year in 2021, then hopefully next year. Before, I just want to step back and just share a little bit about All Israel News for a second and the tours that we're doing in partnership with Travelujah, and just share my screen. So most of you, I'm sure, know about allisrael.com because hopefully you signed up there. And so we're a news site that started in September 1st, led by our editor-in-chief, Joel Rosenberg, who is a New York Times bestselling author and Middle East expert. And yeah, so just September 1st, we started. We're actually two websites. We're All Israel News and All Arab News. And really, if you ask how you can help us, I would say if you could sign up for the email and share with your friends, for those who can also receive the email updates. That would be a big help for us to reach the Christian world. Our goal is to be the go-to site for the evangelical Christian world regarding news from Israel. We are Israel-based. I'm in the Judean hills, even though it doesn't look like it from the background of my screen. I live in the hills around Jerusalem. Joel Rosenberg lives in Jerusalem proper, and our staff is also in Israel. So we are Israel-based, and we have a nonprofit in the United States that's tax exempt called Near East Media. So two ways that you can help us is to sign up for the emails, tell your friends, and you can donate. Before I get to the donate slide, I'll share we have a YouTube channel that you can see a lot of the interviews that Joel Rosenberg has done with Israeli politicians, as well as evangelical figures. So you can see a list here, and you can go to our YouTube channel. You can also donate to us. As I said, we're a tax-exempt organization in the United States, and we are reader supported. So if you believe like us that there needs to be more credible, trustworthy news from Israel, from the source in Israel, to the Christian world, from a biblical perspective, or through a biblical lens, that Joel likes to say, then please support us at All Israel News. And we're partnering with Travelujah on this tour, as well as future tours. And as all of us are dealing with the pandemic around the world, the COVID pandemic, this has really decimated the tourism industry. really decimated. I mean, our airport is closed as we speak now on February 20th. But really, our first shutdown started March 14th, 2020. So we're here almost 1 year later from our first shutdown. Really, the tourism industry, all the tour guides, the bus drivers, the shops, really has been a almost of a death blow for many companies. And so we look to our Christian friends. First of all, we're happy at All Israel News as a young organization to be able to partner with Travelujah in order to provide virtual tours, in order to circumvent the fact that you can't come to Israel, but still to try to give some connection that's also educational for you. So yeah, and for those who have been to Israel, you probably know when you're on a tour and you get off the bus at the end of the tour, you usually can show your appreciation or thanks to the tour guide by giving a tip of appreciation. So because we are not all on one bus where we get off the bus and have a tip jar, we're going to have a virtual tip jar. And so I just want to give this opportunity for all those who registered to show your support for Israel and helping the Israeli economy and helping Travelujah in particular, and Oren and Itamar and Elisa, and to show their appreciation to them. On behalf of All Israel News, we want to show our appreciation, and you can go to this PayPal link, and you can give as you feel led to give. So that's just a little bit about All Israel News and Travelujah, and I hope there's lots of questions. And we have very knowledgeable tour guides here. So back to Itamar and Oren and Elisa.
Yeah, so we have a few questions, and I'm sure some of you might want to open up your mic, but let's take it one at a time. Let's start with, I know a couple of them were answered, but not everybody's looking in the chat. So I think for the to meet, so everybody can have hear some of the questions that have already been answered. Let's just review for a second the distance between along the pilgrim's path, along with the elevation, if you could describe that. And also, please describe who can pray at the Temple Mount and why. And we'll start with that. So Itamar and Oren.
Yeah, I'll take that. Starting from 1967, shortly after the Six-Day War, Moshe Dayan, the Minister of Defense at that time, got to an oral agreement, status quo, known as the status quo. It's not a written agreement, don't look it up. The understandings were that the Waqf is the Islamic Council, will control the mountain in the sense of maintenance, modesty, keeping the modesty, making sure that the prayers are held, and will allow the non-Muslims to visit the mountain, but only at specific times, a few hours in the morning and 1 hour during noontime. Visitation rights were given to non-Muslims, but not prayer rights. So this is the status quo starting from 1967. So in as much as we consider that the holiest place, Jews don't pray on the Temple Mount itself, but only at the Western Wall. The Western Wall and the Western Wall tunnels, this is the closest we can get to pray near the Holy of Holies. And Christians that go on the mountain would not pray either. They would visit it, they would learn the story from the pastors or the guides that will take them, but they would not pray either. So that's,
and let me just add
yeah.
that if somebody does pray or looks like they're praying, like Judaism, you see a lot of time religious men going back and forth, what they call davening, and they may be moving their bodies. If they see that kind of emotion up there, people could be arrested. So it's really purely for visitation purposes. You're also not allowed into the Dome of the Rock or or the mosque, but you are able to tour freely, but not pray.
I'll take the
And then
second,
somebody
the
did
first
ask
half
if
actually
Jews,
of the question.
Yeah.
The distance. Try to think from the southern gate and the Pool of Siloam that's right next to it to the Temple Mount is something like 700 yards. To the temple itself, add another few hundred yards, but that's just the distance. The elevation is about 350 feet in height. So it's not only a walk, it's also a hike uphill, and it's actually an ascent as Itamar was taking us up the Mughrabi Gate. The bridge, we're actually talking about of an ascent that is a physical one, but a spiritual one as well. Any more questions?
and then there was a question here about, we just answered, but just to make sure to be clear, that yes, Jews are allowed to go to the Temple Mount, just as Christians are, during certain times of the day. So that is, you are absolutely able to go there. When tour groups come, we tend to try to have groups go to the Temple Mount at 7:30 in the morning. We'll line them up at 7 o'clock. They go up from 7:30 till approximately, they're allowed up there till approximately 10:30 or 11, depending on the time of the year. And then there's another hour in the afternoon around 12:30 or 1, but it's easiest to visit in the morning. So we get groups up really early and we go up there. And another question here is, why do some rabbis discourage Jews from visiting the Temple Mount?
So, Oren, if you don't mind.
Interesting question.
So, according to Judaism, we don't have the red heifer and the red heifer ash, and that's how we purify from a very severe impurity called impurity to the dead. So if someone went to a funeral, there is like a whole ceremony that took place after that. It takes a week in order to be purified from the dead. And the priests would sprinkle them water with the ashes, stirred with the ashes of the red heifer on the third day, on the seventh day, and only then they could go up, they were cleaned, and they were able to visit the temple again. Since we don't have that, the red heifer ash and the holy water from the days of the temple were not pure enough to get near the location of what we call in Hebrew the Azara, the court of the temple itself. So this is the reason why most rabbis and the chief rabbinate would discourage Jews from going up to the Temple Mount. A few hundreds of rabbis and the scholars were gathered and basically said, okay, we measured, we know where the temple used to be, we know where the Azara, where the court used to be, and we can only walk around it in purity, and that should be enough. It's not the best purity, but it's good enough just to walk around that court. And many religious Jews would go up to the Temple Mount, but only in a very specific areas and not too close again to where the Golden Dome is.
Itamar, a couple questions to you because we discussed the Temple Mount. Some scholars have said the Temple Mount complex was actually a Roman garrison complex and that the actual temple was a little south of the current platform. And then the second question is, how do you know? You said that David would not attack Jerusalem from the north because he did not want to desecrate the future Temple Mount. Is that in the Bible? Can you answer both of those?
Yes.
Please?
So about the Temple Mount, the way we look at it today, it's a Roman building, a Herodian building. Basically, the walls are retaining walls that support a massive plaza that was dedicated to the temple itself. Having said that, on the northwest corner of the Temple Mount, there used to be the Antonia Fortress or Citadel. And we know it from various sources. Perhaps Owen could elaborate even more about it, but the Antonia Fortress was a garrison, but not the Temple Mount itself. The Temple Mount was dedicated again to the temple. The other question was again?
Was about, sorry.
Why he didn't attack from the north, yeah.
Yes,
okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Is that in the and is that in the Bible?
It's not in the Bible. It's not in the Bible. It's look, we take the liberty to understand from the topography and from our scholars and from our rabbis. We take the liberty sometimes to point out the blind spot that the Bible leaves us. You know, the text is very, very short, very condensed, but we try to read between the lines. This is something that we constantly do, to read between the words and between the verses. And again, historically, Jerusalem, whenever it was attacked, it was always attacked from the north. Okay, it's very basic for every strategist or every military commander to attack a city that sits in a low hill, to attack it from its weak point, which is in this case, the northern part of the mountain, which is, again, takes you just downhill all the way to the fortifications of the city of David. So it's much easier to attack it from the north, whether to attack it from the south, or definitely from an inferior area such as the water shaft. Okay, so again, why would David do that? My main understanding is that he didn't want to desecrate and shed blood in an area that is holy for Abraham and for our forefathers. So this is, again, my interpretation, or let's say our interpretation, but it is not written in the text itself.
Can you speak a bit about Oren, perhaps, or Itamar, artifacts under the dome? Have they found anything? Is there an assumption that there are artifacts underneath the dome?
Okay, I'll give just a very quick thing. We don't know, to say the truth, what's under the dome.
Right.
But I'll connect to the question before about the Temple Mount as maybe not the Temple Mount, and go to artifacts. We have several inscriptions, ancient inscriptions, part of them from the Second Temple period, that were discovered. One, for example, was a Greek inscription, a no entrance sign beyond the Soreg. I saw someone just asked about it. That was mentioned by Josephus Flavius in the 1st century Common Era. A full text of that inscription was found in the north of the Temple Mount. So if we claim that that's a garrison, how can an inscription, wander half a mile away from its origin? Wandering a few dozen yards makes sense. And that's already something connecting. Next to the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount, they also found a Hebrew inscription that mentions the trumpeting. So these are 2 examples. There are a few more little examples that actually take us to understand that that was the gathering place and not anywhere else. Yeah. And the third thing about that is that it can't be anywhere else, or at least we have no finds that indicate any other option. Anything else?
Let's see. Please, if anybody has any other questions, we have a couple more minutes.
I just see someone just asked me. I read there has been Islamic excavations on the Temple Mount. Was this legal, and did this compromise the platform? So I'll get a little bit into it. In the 1990s, a space called Solomon Stables, which is basically the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount, just behind Itamar. You can see it just to the left of Itamar. You can see the space.
Share my screen
and that area within the Temple Mount was here. He's sharing. You'll see it a little better. That area was renovated and changed dramatically at the end of the 1990s. And doing that, it changed a lot of the engineering pressures and issues in construction of the Temple Mount. And that's exactly what Itamar is showing. That almost made the southern wall of Temple Mount collapse, let's say the truth. But it was reinforced. And yes, it changed a lot. These excavations were done illegally with no archaeological supervision. And lots of archaeological context was lost. But the majority of the dirt, rocks, and rubble was thrown outside the Temple Mount, and therefore actually was accessible. And Israeli archaeologists have been working on this project for more than 15 years, actually discovering the debris and pottery and coins and whatever's left behind. What you see right now is the modern staircase leading into Solomon's Stables. For the construction of this, look at this massive deep pit. All the dirt, earth, whatever was inside here was thrown out. So that's the first large piece of archaeological information, even though out of context, but still the finds can be identified. And that's what we have of the area. I'll just really summarize it quickly. The Second Temple period compromises of more than 30% of the finds. Or in archaeological words, they'll say statistically, there was a lot of activity in the area at that time. And that's not such a big surprise if we're talking about the main pilgrimage site with hundreds of thousands of visitors arriving per year.
Oren, is there something that they're specifically looking for right now that you are aware of?
There are 2 main sites in excavation at the city of David at the moment. One is continuing the pilgrimage road that's behind me on the screen right now. That's my background. Continuing, it's unfortunately totally demolished, I have to say the truth. Apparently late Roman, Byzantine eras took large pieces of the street apart, and they've been excavating some 45 yards and found nothing, totally removed. And about 200 yards north, just outside the city walls of today, is the Givati parking lot that I have to say one thing about it, that's what brought me to the city of David. As a student, I worked in the excavation there. February 2003, so 18 years ago, I worked there. And that's exactly the area right now in the center of the screen. So that excavation has been continuing for, as you understand, 18 years already, and more is being discovered. These are the two main sites in the city of David excavations happening today.
Great. Well, I just want to add that when and hopefully if you all come to Israel at some point, the city of David is really one of the most remarkable sites in Jerusalem and is certainly a must-see. And there's many ways to see it. There are, you saw the dry tunnel. There are wet tunnels, which are great if you're coming with children in the middle of the summer. And there are also there's the tunnel that you saw, or the tunnel, the sewage tunnels that take you to the Robinson's Arch and up towards the Temple Mount. And hopefully they'll be opening up this Pilgrim's Road. But we have been doing some VIP tours right before COVID set in, where we're taking some small groups in there. And so we do get permission for that. But again, it's not open to the public, but there are different ways to come and see that. And it should definitely be, a half of your day at least when you're coming to Israel. And hopefully you'll all be coming one day very, very soon. Is there a couple other questions on here before we sign off?
They're asking, what is the next virtual tour?
The next virtual tour. Yeah, we have one. What's the date? Joseph, March 20th.
Yeah, March 20th. March the 20th.
March 20th.
I was gonna tell you to mention this, but the person already asked. So yes,
beat us to it.
The Western Negev. So you can explain March 20th.
Right. So March 20th is going to be a very interesting tour, slightly geopolitical. The Western Negev is an area that borders on the Gaza Strip. Part of it borders on the Gaza Strip. We're going to go into a kibbutz that sits along the Gaza Strip inside the internationally recognized boundaries of Israel. We will learn about life in what we call the front line, and you'll actually meet somebody there, an amazing woman who will tell you a little bit about what life is like, and show you, unfortunately, some of the things that have occurred there over the last since disengagement, maybe 2005, and we'll learn about the geopolitics of that region, with Egypt, with Israel, and some of the history behind that. So I really urge you. I think it's obviously with an election coming up in the Palestinian territories, with what's going on between Hamas and Fatah, and obviously we are constantly having issues with the Gaza Strip. It's an area that one day can be perfectly calm, and then the next day obviously there can be missiles and mortar fire, and again inside communities that are within and have always been within the internationally recognized boundaries of Israel. So we'll learn a little bit about that history, and then what life is like today. So I do hope you can join us. And I just want to take a moment and thank everybody. I want to thank Itamar and Oren for a fabulous program, and Joseph for your partnership. Really, really appreciate it. And obviously to all of you who took the time, today for, out of your day for an hour and 25 minutes of this program. And I do hope you all enjoyed it and have learned and found value in this session. Thank you.
Likewise, I would like to thank all who joined and supported this tour and supported all Israel and our partners at Travelujah. And thank you to Oren and Itamar and Lisa. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you on March 20th. I'll be sending a link, an email with a link to this recording, as well as with information how to sign up for the next virtual tour. So look in the email. Any last comments?
Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you all for joining, and I'll put on the slides. Some people asked about the pages I showed previously, so I'll be sharing.
Okay.
Thank you, and shalom from Israel.
Gadol Elohai, Shiu ki gadol Elohai, kol echad yireh ki gadol